Hello and welcome to the CBB Supershow. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, a.k.a. Dub Deuces 85, the niche sports connoisseur. CBB is here. We are grinding our way through February. The FTN Network, we're live on the West Coast. Appreciate everybody who's tuning in as well. Whether you're watching live or on demand, I value you all equally. And you can show me that continued support by slapping that like button right now. Doesn't take much to do, but it does really help our show and our network as people search for CBB and DFS content. Your likes, your support, your views, your comments even help us with their algorithm and be seen. What a wild weekend it's been. If you're new to the show, welcome. What we do here is cover college basketball from a DFS, a sports betting, and a prop pick betting perspective. I cover each and every game from the main slate with a primary focus on DraftKings. Anyone playing FanDuel, if you have those questions or a need for FanDuel content, we can definitely offer that as well. As I go through and break down each game, I will give you my favorite plays, anyone I think is overpriced, underpriced, sneaky, or otherwise. At the very end, we'll give a 2 to 3 player core, one in which you can use for pretty much all formats, whether that's GBP, head-to-heads, cash, anything like that. A solid group of players that you'll be able to utilize. We'll also list any advantageous PrizePicks lines and then any and all betting opportunities that I might see. If you're a returner, make sure you pull up your seat, sit around, gather around, class. We're going to get into this slate here in one moment. Lots to do. There is the NBA All-Star break, which will be coming to an end here shortly, but because of it, we are getting a ton of great prize pools. There was a bunch of overlay today, but that's what happens when you have a 3-game slate featuring 3 of the top 10 defenses in the country. And you know what? It ended up being a low-scoring slate as expected. We do move to a 12-gamer tonight, or tomorrow, I should say. Prizes are great. The February fadeaway tournament going on, which is $10K to first. We had one today as well, which was like their warm-up event for this. This is the main event. 3,267 players. This will definitely fill up. I know a lot of tickets and Saudis have been for this one. It's 10K to first, 3K to second, and 1K to third. And then it goes progressively down from there. But it is a pretty decent flat payout if you can make it into like the top 40-ish range and you're doing the MME thing, which is 98 entrants in this one. There is an opportunity to make some good money. Also, qualifier number 40 at the $60 level. Still plenty of chances to get in. The mini max, which is the 1K to first, $1 GBP with 7,100 entrants this time. That's pretty damn fun. The 33 is a 1K to first. That's bumped up. And then you also have the 2-2-2, which is, I believe, 2.5K to first. So lots of 2.5K to first, 40 entrance, lots of opportunities to pad the bankroll, make some money before those NBA guys go back to their professional basketball that's played at such a higher level with defense on every possession and nothing but teamwork and motivation the whole way. All right. So lay that all out of the way. We're going to get into it and we're going to steamroll through. Now, really important because this is popping up. Sometimes these slates lock a little bit earlier. So this is a 3:30 PST/6:30 EST lock. Make sure you don't get caught with a dummy lineup in there or not prepared. This does lock 30 minutes earlier than what you are used to, and this still trips people up. To this day, we're into February, months after the opening night, and still having that trip people up. So make sure you're aware of the time, and we're going to get right up into this here. First game on the slate, Butler versus Villanova. Now, there are a couple of games that they left off the slate that I thought maybe they should have considered. There were blowouts that didn't make the slate, but then there were blowouts that did make the slate. So we'll see how it ends up here. But first game on the slate, Nova 6-point favorites, total of 141. When it comes to Butler, we usually like to look at my man, Posh Alexander, who's priced pretty reasonable at 6.6K. He's had a couple of solid games. 4 of his last 5, he's been over the 22 fantasy point threshold, which includes a pretty solid outing. They got their doors absolutely blown off by Creighton, 79-57, but Posh did produce 13 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists. He took 11 shots and shot 54%. That's what we like to see from Posh, being more aggressive and taking those shots. Definitely like him at 6.6K. The matchup against Villanova is not very good. Now, Nova's clearly not as good without Jay Wright. That was something that nobody expected, or thought of otherwise here with Kyle Neptune. I do think Neptune got a little bit of a raw deal in that people place such high expectations on him so fast. But what he did at Fordham wasn't that great in his one season, and it just seemed kind of odd to think he was going to come in here and just detonate with this roster. People also say Jay Wright wouldn't take this team to the tournament, but I would argue with that adamantly and say that yes, with a roster that has Eric Dixon, TJ Bamba, and Tyler Burton, and even like a half shell of himself, Justin Moore, Jay Wright would have this team winning well over 20 games. I have no doubt about that. But this Villanova team is playing extremely well defensively. That is one thing they can hang their hat on. They're top 20 in defensive efficiency per Ken Palm, and they have done an absolute great job holding teams down. 54 points is what they held the Hoyas to over the weekend, 70-54 win. They did a 80-54 home win against Seton Hall. Seton Hall playing really well under Shaheen Holloway. Kadari Richmond just getting back after missing a few games there, but still a complete undressing at the Wells Fargo Center there by Villanova. They held Xavier to just 56. They ended up losing that game on the road, but again, they're involved in some really low-scoring games. Now, last time they played Butler, they did lose 88-81, and that was on the road, but that game also went to double overtime, which, of course, kicked a lot of those stats up. In that one, Posh had 12, 8, and 4. DJ Davis scored 28 points because he knocked down 5 of his 11 triples. We saw Jamil Telfort with 22 and 11. Eric Dixon was phenomenal, 28 points, 5 assists, 6 rebounds, a couple of blocks. Tyler Burton with a double-double of 13 and 10, and TJ Bamba had 14. Solid stat lines all around. But again, I'm not too keen on this game in general. Pulling up I have a lot of minutes to edit and stuff to do on my projection or on our projection sheet that we do. But looking at the initial run through here, Eric Dixon is the top projected player of the Villanova side at 7.7K. Justin Moore really cheap at 5.3, but at this point you just have to accept that he's just not the same level of scorer and athlete and producer of fantasy points that he was in past seasons. Injuries have ravaged him to the point where even at 5.3, we're just not that interested. I do sprinkle him into a couple of alt builds in my GPPs just in case, but overall we're not talking about using him in our main builds anymore. The rest of the roster, fairly priced. I think TJ Bamba at 6.3, Mark Armstrong at 5.6. Really hard for me to get excited about him. We do have a interesting price on Tyler Burton at 6K. I do like him. I think Burton, he was such a stud at Richmond. He has games where he's really on point, games where he's totally out of the loop. So hopefully we get a motivated Tyler Burton here, but he's definitely playable. But for value at 4.5, we have to look at Brennan Hausen. He is really stepping up off the bench here. It's just another guard/wing that Nova has. They've got a ton of them. He played 24 minutes in that game against Georgetown. All of his shots were from long range. He knocked down 4 of 10, 12 points, 4 rebounds. It's his third straight game eclipsing 20 fantasy points. 4.5 is a very reasonable price, and he is a value that I'm interested in. It might feel a little bit of a chase. I did use him on the last slate there in some of my alt builds. Now I'm considering him for our main. has one of the better offensive ratings on the team and in the conference, shooting 42% from long range as well, and his shot rate has ballooned now to 22%. In conference play, he has the third highest offensive rating, and usually when you see those guys, those are the ones getting bunnies or high percentage shots, right, and the fast breaks. No, this is primarily a three-point shooter with a great offensive rating, a solid true shooting percentage, low turnover rate, and somebody who in conference play is also shooting almost 50% from long range, which is the number one overall percentage in the Big East. Brendan Housen, definitely somebody to consider. The super sophomore is becoming a really reliable scorer and player overall, and seems to be the heir apparent when Justin Moore goes off next year, and DJ Bamba, who I believe is out of eligibility. There's going to be a lot of playing time for Housen to step up here, and Hakeem Hart will also be out of eligibility. On the Butler side, I talked about Posh, who we like, of course. Jamil Telfort has, done really well. It's caused his price to balloon. He's up over 7K. Not really that interested in him. DJ Davis at 6'1" because of his high shot rate and his three-point shooting ability. He's definitely in play there, but between Davis and Posh, those are my two guys that I want to consider the most from Butler. Maybe a little bit of Pierre Brooks at 6'3", but for the most part, don't love very many Butler guys. Andre Screen at 4'5" is kind of one of those, like, you throw him in begrudgingly because you need a value, but you don't feel great about him. He definitely has the chops to play well, but if Jalen Thomas is not in foul trouble, it seems like those minutes just aren't going to come Screen's way. For a while, Thomas was getting into foul trouble, wasn't playing very good, played under 20 minutes in 3 straight. Since then, he has played 20, 28, and 25 minutes, and he has looked much better, scoring 24-plus fantasy points in back-to-back games. So right now, Screen's not playable unless you think Thomas is going to struggle against this Villanova front court. All right, moving on to the next game here. Hey, NC State super fan. Carolina basketball is where it's at, man. I kind of wish I lived in Carolina. Not even kind of, like I do. I feel like we got to get all the FTN community together for the AAC tournament. Like, we all need to go to the American tournament and then the Missouri Valley tournament. Like, I wish I was just super rich that I could just be like, everybody, let's go. Maybe one day. All right, next game on the slate, Texas A&M versus Arkansas. This is a total of 145.5. The Aggies are 10.5-point favorites. Arkansas, what can we say about Arkansas? We know Tremont Mark's going to get minutes. I might as well just record myself anytime Arkansas is on the slate and then just play it and then walk off for 5 minutes and come back. Essentially, we know Tremont Mark, he's going to play big minutes. We know Devo Davis is for the majority of the time going to play over 30 minutes as well. He played 25 in their last game, which was close against Mississippi State, but those are the two that we at least know they're not going to get rugged. Like, they might play 35 to 38. They might play 25 to 28, but they're not going to get rugged to the point where they're playing 3 minutes. L. Ellis, Khalif Battle, Chandler Lawson, Jeremiah Davenport, these are all guys who will get rug pulled at any time. Now, we did see L. Ellis play 35 minutes against Mississippi State, and that is something that could certainly be a possibility. He is starting and has been. Khalif Battle starting and playing 34 minutes. He actually played extremely well. That's something we haven't seen from him too often. It's the first time he started in the last 3, but it does look like he's primed and going to be a starter for the foreseeable future. But again, we don't really know if that's going to be the case with Muss. Chandler Lawson is stuck in this 15 and 20-minute starter role. And then we did see Mekhi Mitchell play 23 really fantastic minutes. 21 points, 9 rebounds, 2 blocks, 2 steals before fouling out, usage rate of 38%. Mekhi Mitchell should probably be playing 35 plus minutes. He has been phenomenal off the bench. I don't mind him coming off the bench, but he's definitely been one of their best players for the last, 2 months of the season. It is interesting to see Jeremiah Davenport played 26 minutes. He wasn't particularly great in those minutes. And then Keon Menefield played 4, which is tough. Leighton Blocker played 3. Menefield, who plays 4, the game before that against Tennessee, he played 14. Against Georgia, he played 31. He was phenomenal. He just, I'm sure he really loves the decision that he made. And I don't talk shit to kids. Like, I think everybody should be allowed to transfer as they want, but I can't I'm way too petty of a person, even in my old age here as I approach 40 years old, to not be super petty when it comes to something like this. So I think Keon Menafield is, probably happy with his decision to leave the purple and gold, where he could have had all the minutes in the world. But, I hope he's having a great time there in Arkansas with 9 other ball dominant guards. This roster is just funky. And by the way, the rumors about Muss taking the what they expect to be an open Louisville job next season. I don't know what the actual possibility of that is and the merits, but there is a ton of message board chatter that Muss will be the head coach of Louisville next year. And if that's the case, this is going to be it's already season's over. They're 12-13, 3-9 in conference. Like, they're going to have to run the table in the conference tournament. That's not going to happen. They're not going to play in the NIT. This is a lame dunk season. Just play Layden Blocker all game. Play Menafield all game. Play Mekhi Mitchell. Give Bay Fall some minutes. Like, come on, man. Let's get these kids some minutes and see what we got here. But they could probably going to have a new coach next year anyways, which means all these guys will be entering the portal anyways. Tremont Mark's down to 6'7". So it's been a while since I've talked about Tremont Mark in a serious standpoint of where we can actually use him. I feel like he is a fantastic option here in this spot at 6'7". That price and this is a fantastic matchup overall. Now, he has been under 30 minutes in back-to-back games, and he's been relatively mediocre, which has caused this price drop. But I do think we see him get back into the mid-30s here. He did put up almost 50 against Texas A&M in their first matchup, 35 points. He got to the foul line, get ready for this, 22 times, made 17 of those. So a lot of points at the foul line, played all 40 minutes in that one. They did win by 1 because of that. He shot 8 of 15 from the field. So Tremont Mark is definitely for what is, I'm trying to think of any other time I talked about using Tremont Mark in a serious like main team situation this season. And I can't think of any. So I believe this will be the first time since he was at Houston that we talked about using him in a main lineup scenario. Mekhi Mitchell at 6'2", he's great. If we think he's going to continue to get minutes, and he's been pretty stable, while the other wings and forwards are having their minutes, jacked up and down, he has been stable in those mid-20s if he's not getting into foul trouble. So 6'2" is fine for him. Devo Davis has come up more, so at 5K, I'm kind of happy about that. When he's at the 4.7, 4.5, like it's almost one of those plays like, yeah, we got to play him. I don't love it. He hasn't produced that well. I don't even have him above 17 fantasy points at that 5K if he plays 35 minutes. Now, he played 25 this last game. If we take him down to 25, then he projects extremely horrible. He's really not that great of a play there. Menafield at 4.4. If he started, we could go there, even though that's not a guarantee. Ellis at 4.9. I think that's probably high enough to stay away from. Jalen Graham, who I believe Jalen didn't even play. Yeah, he didn't play last game, which gives him he got a questionable tag for this one. He's dealing with a shoulder injury. Now, that flared up 2 games ago, I believe, against Georgia. But he did end up playing 23 minutes against Tennessee, and it didn't seem to bother him that much watching that game, but I guess it is something that's enough for him to at least be questionable and possibly out. If he is out, that only further strengthens the play of Mitchell there at 6'2". Maybe Chandler Lawson, who's priced only at 4.3 if we think he could get a few extra minutes, or Jeremiah Davenport, who played 20-plus minutes off the bench in 3.4K, which is interesting. Khalif Battle as a starter at 4.6. That one could go either way. I have him as a pretty strong play if he gets 30 minutes, obviously, but there's really no guarantee of that either. So I'm going to go Tremont Mark and Mekhi Mitchell, which is the higher priced of the group. Not very imaginative, I know, but that's really the only way we can play this one that's in a main team scenario. Texas A&M. Now the Saturday slate, the main slate was for me was not good. I know a lot of you struggled. Some of you did pretty well, but there were a lot of just busted plays. Wade Taylor was one of those. Priced at 8.3, so he wasn't horrific at 22 fantasy points. Played all the minutes in the world, but for the most part, Alabama stuffed them in a locker. 75 points is what they scored, but they gave up 100 to Alabama. That's a tough loss. I thought that would be much, much closer. Home games in college, man, you got to really be careful about sometimes road teams because the home court advantage in college basketball is a pretty big deal. It's a lot of parity in CBB this year, but the home court is the equalizer there sometimes. So Wade Taylor is an excellent price here at 8.2K. Back-to-back mediocre games, which has caused this price dip. Now, he was at 9K last time, or just about a month ago, just about 8-1 last time they played Arkansas. Now, he also battling Tremont Mark. He had 13 free throws in this one, 14 triples, 13 of 32. That's right. He took 32 shots last time they played Arkansas in a close game. He hung 56, 41 real points, 6 rebounds, only 1 dime. Gotta love it. 41 points and 1 assist, but 56.5 fantasy points. Gotta love Wade Taylor here at home. Now, they have lost back-to-back games. The tough loss on the road by 1 point to Vanderbilt. Texas A&M has to stop the bleeding. They need a win. They got to take care of business here against Arkansas, and that means Wade Taylor should play 38, maybe even 39 minutes, maybe the whole game. I can't imagine him not playing the entire game unless he uncharacteristically picks up 2 fouls. We have gone a long time, months and months this season of not getting hit by 2 fouls and all this problem. Like, I think I jinxed myself and us, so I apologize. I'm not normally a jinx, but I can't have to accept responsibility because I had mentioned I don't tilt over fouls. We're not dealing with foul trouble much this year, and literally the very next day, the gods had to hit us with 2 fouls from Tamin Lipsey, who has not been the same since. We've been getting foul trouble galore for guys who aren't usually getting into foul trouble, so we're going to break the curse here, and we're going to get over this, but Wade Taylor, if he picks up 2 fouls early tomorrow, it is the DFS gods still making me pay. I haven't slaughtered a goat yet, but I'm very, very close to doing so if Wade Taylor gets into some trouble. But he's definitely a main team caliber play here at 8.2. Have to love all the shares of Wade Taylor, and I think he'll be relatively popular. At 35 minutes, he projects at 4.8x. If he plays like 39, as I imagine he will, he is putting up over 40 fantasy points with ease. Tyrese Radford, also strong play at 7K. He's the Robin to Wade Taylor's Batman. There are times when Taylor doesn't take off, and that is usually when Radford does. I don't normally like to play them together, but this is a spot where I think it can work. And then at 5.8, the sneakier option of the team, Solo Washington, who is a foul risk, but I love him here against this Arkansas team. They're going to be trying to do their whole highlight blocks thing, and the front court of Arkansas and overall their lineup gets into a lot of foul trouble. If Washington plays his cards right and he can stay out of foul trouble, I think he's going to end up being at the foul line 10 plus times. Good opportunity at 5.8 for him to pay off. 3 of his last 5, he has eclipsed 25 fantasy points. He had 14-8 against Alabama, was really solid there. 11-7 against Tennessee with 3 blocks. That was a game in which they won 85-69. He was a big reason for that, and he has really taken over as the top front court player now, and I really like Solo Washington, not only the rest of this year, but next year as well. You also have Jace Carter, who's relatively cheap at 5.6. He's been fairly steady, playing the 4th or 5th option, which isn't great, but he's over 30 minutes. That's a cheap price. Anderson Garcia is a fantastic GBP play. Now, he fouled out in 19 minutes against Bama, but he had 12 rebounds. Anderson Garcia is a phenomenal player. We've been following this kid for the last 3 or 4 years. He's been a sneaky brand favorite of mine. We had been using him at min price 4.5, just a guy to plug in. And now that he's getting these huge minutes and he's such a big factor and he doesn't have to score to get these huge scores. 17 rebounds against Tennessee, 16 against Missouri, and then 12 against Alabama, all while scoring just 3, 6, and 7 real points, yet he put up 23, 26, and 39 fantasy points. So I love Anderson Garcia here. Fouls, something that happens, but he grabs a ton of rebounds. When they played Arkansas last time, he had 10 points, 12 rebounds for 32.5 fantasy points. It was a fantasy gold mine of a game, and I suspect it will be here as well. It's a big-time game stack on both sides. If you're running in that, 10K to first, a 2 Arkansas, 4 Texas A&M type build may very well take it down. It's at least going to be in the mix. You hit overtime in a game like this, and you are going to be waltzing to the top 3 finish. Henry Coleman is cheap at 5.5 now because of the Anderson Garcia early foul out. It did offer Henry Coleman the opportunity to play 30 minutes there in that game, and it was also a blowout. He looked relatively fine, 12 points, 5 rebounds, 24 fantasy points. I don't think we'll see him play those minutes here, but he is interesting if you think Solo gets into foul trouble or Garcia. Coleman is the next man up. Gave up his alpha front court role to those guys, but he could definitely step up and play well here potentially. All right, next game on the slate, we have Tennessee versus Missouri. Now, Tennessee's 12-point favorites on the road, 147. Missouri, we were talking about disappointing teams in the Discord today, and teams like Miami were named, Maryland, Michigan State. These are some of the teams who just did not reach expectations and are falling off. And one team for me that also didn't get named, but probably should have, would be Missouri. I like Dennis Gates, their head coach. I think he's extremely good, very underrated. The job he did at Cleveland State, much better than it looks on paper for his record. Took last year's Missouri team to 25-10, made an appearance in the tournament, won a game. And this team that they bring in here, and talent-wise, certainly should have been a potential tournament team or a 20-win team, and they're only 8-17. Injuries didn't really do them in, although they haven't had Caleb Grill much of this season. I don't know how much of a big difference he would have made. Sean East, who took that step forward as an alpha guard. Tamar Bates is shooting lights out. The problem is Nick Honor never recaptured his ability that he showed during his freshman season at Fordham. And also Noah Carter, who I expected to be a big time fantasy asset this year, take over the gaping usage minutes hole left behind by Kobe Brown, who's now in the NBA. And that just hasn't happened. He's had some nice games, but most of the time he's been terrible. I don't think we can really get too excited about any of the Missouri guys. It's going to be difficult to want to use any of them in a really tough matchup against a Tennessee team that's probably going to pelt them. Now, Noah Carter is cheap at 5'9". He is going to project over 4x, but I would caution him, obviously, and especially in this spot against Tennessee. We do have a value in Kurt Lewis at 4.4, who's at least somewhat interesting, regardless of how that game sets up. With Kurt Lewis having a questionable tag, we'll have to see. Now, he played 27 minutes against Texas A&M a couple of weeks ago, 24 against Mississippi State. We'll see how his injury status shakes out and if he's back in the starting lineup, but he is an interesting value there either way if he does play. As far as anyone else, Sean East, 7K. It's a fair price, not great. You have some cheapies in Aiden Shaw, Jordan Butler, and Nick Honor, and then Tamar Bates, who has been absolutely phenomenal at 6'9". He's going to be the volume guy here, and they're going to have to rely on him heavily. He did have 23 in their last game against Ole Miss, but he's more of a secondary option there, not one that I'm going to be prioritizing. Sean East, in his return after missing a couple of games, put up 35 against Ole Miss, but I do suspect Tennessee will work hard to shut him down and make him a primary focus. So with that being said, we're not on Missouri too heavily, but we are going to look at Tennessee and, blowouts be damned. I want some exposure here. Prices are going to be high. 8.7 for Dalton Connect, 7.6 for Jonas Idu, 8K for Sakai Zeigler. You're even getting into some prices here. 6.1 for Triple J, 5.4 for Santiago Vescovi, and a little bit of a value piece here in Jordan Gainey at 4.6. Now, I got a little galaxy brain with Jordan Gainey over the weekend thinking, hey, in a blowout, I could play him. He's been getting 20 minutes. He got the 20 minutes against Vanderbilt, but he was awful, shot 0 of 6, didn't pay off. The game before that against Arkansas, he was phenomenal, shot 6 of 8. Very streaky score, but he is somebody that's going to play this 20 minutes off the bench, and it's a phenomenal matchup against Missouri. So I don't hate the idea of using him as a value piece there, sub 5K. Now, I probably would imagine none of the Tennessee upper tier price guys are going to end up that chalky just because of the restrictive pricing. Under 9K for Dalton Connect is always interesting, but if the game's not competitive, he does take his foot off the gas a little bit. We know that. I typically prefer Zeigler. Not only are we getting a $700 discount, but he's going to contribute highly in other categories such as assists, steals and rebounds, which makes him a little bit of a safer option there. And that is a reasonable price at 8K. I think he's a pretty fine main team option, especially for single entry contest. Gotta love Jonas Idu. If he doesn't get into foul trouble, this Missouri front court is going to have no answer for him whatsoever. He has scored 30 points or more in back-to-back games, 3 of his last 5, including the likes of Arkansas, Vanderbilt, and Kentucky. Did struggle with fouls in the game against Texas A&M, but overall, he is just way too skilled of a interior presence here for this matchup and should be considered a high-level GPP look. If you land there in your main, I wouldn't mind that either. Triple J is the kind of guy who is a true GPP winner. We've been dealing with him for years. This is a weird spot for him because he's not the alpha on this team. He is strong in peripherals. He can score, but it seems like he gets lost in the shuffle, and he's perfectly content not being this big, stat sheet stuffer. He takes the back seat. He's out there for his defense. If the team needs him for offense, he contributes, but he's definitely one of those, 4th or 5th options at this point. So it's kind of tricky to use him, but the price is okay. Vescovi at 5.4. I like him in this spot. I think he's better in competitive games, but he has been taking more shots, looking a little more aggressive, so that's good. He did score 12 points, 5 dimes in that win against Vanderbilt, so he's fine at 5.4 as well. Just going to be a big-time minutes play there, depending on how you think this game shakes out. Maybe Missouri plays inspired. All right, next game on the slate, we have Iowa versus Michigan State. Now, Michigan State's 10-point favorites, total of 154. I don't know. Every time we go to rule out Iowa or we say, hey, this Iowa, game, stack up the other team, they're going to score a ton of points. But then we keep getting let down because Iowa, in all their glory, 173rd in defensive efficiency, they end up watering games down a little bit, or they're making it so that fantasy goodness isn't happening. That game against Maryland, where Maryland did score 78 and win, they held Jameer Young down below 30 fantasy points. Now, he scored 21 real, but he was awful in that first half. They did give up 16 and 13 to Julian Reese, but overall, there wasn't a ton of fantasy production in that game whatsoever. They did just beat Wisconsin in overtime, 88-86. AJ Storr and Stephen Crowell had really good games, but for the most part, Max Klesmit got shut down. He had 8 assists. Tyler Wall was pretty awful in that one, suffered foul trouble. Chucky Hepburn scored 18. And then on the Iowa side, you had 4 of their 5 starters score double figures. So I think we want to look at the Iowa side here a little bit more than maybe we have been lately, especially going up against a Michigan State team that has been genuinely disappointing. Again, we talked about disappointing teams in the Discord today. Michigan State was one of the first teams mentioned. Looking at Michigan State, there are some really good prices for a matchup like this on paper. AJ Hoggard at 6'9", which I know is tough because offensively he can be challenged, but he definitely has a facilitating ability that can rack up fantasy points. I do like him a little bit more than I normally would, especially in a matchup like this. Tyson Walker is a strong play at 7'5". Jaden Akins is cheap at 6'2", shooting confidently. He really kind of slept walking into the season after, testing the draft waters. But now as we get closer to March, we're starting to see him turn it up. You do have Malik Hall, who I love. That's our guy against Penn State. We're always using him, but he's priced at 7.5 now, and that's a really tough price. He was 7.6 against Michigan after his damn near 50. He had a nice game against them, 18-4, but the price is so high, he only put up 21. He's not paying off. So I don't think we can pay that for Malik Hall. He does initially project well because of this matchup and how great he has been if we give him 35 plus minutes, which I think he will play. So he's not the worst play in the world at that price, but I would rather play Tyson Walker. Hall's just a little bit more comfortable for me at the mid 6K range at most. Carson Cooper has been steady off the bench, a decent fantasy point per minute player, but because of his solid production of the last 3 or 4 games, he has usurped the 5K range. He's priced at 5.1 now. He's an okay value option there. We know he's going to get around 18 to 20 minutes. It's a fine matchup, but we're not talking about 4.1. We're talking about 5.1. That's a little bit more difficult to get to. Trey Holloman's there at 4.2. He hasn't been getting the same consistent minutes that he was earlier in the season. But after that Illinois game, he did play 22 against Michigan. So perhaps he's getting his role back and off the bench there as one of the primary guards to see the second unit minutes. On Iowa, Owen Freeman is priced back up astronomically high, and that's because he put up a just class, like a legendary performance against Wisconsin. This stat line is so beautiful. 20 points, 12 rebounds, 6 assists, 4 blocks, and 2 steals, 6 of 6 from the field, 8 of 11 from the foul line, 56 fantasy points. I tell you guys, Owen Freeman is going to be the next Luka Garza. It is lazy to say because it's Iowa to Iowa, but when you look at Luka Garza's early career, when he was not the main focal point of the team, he had some breakout games. He showed flashes, but for the most part, nobody really saw his big, junior and senior seasons coming. With Freeman, I think it's become a little bit more prevalent because he's been putting up big game after big game. Now, this is the second time in the last 3 he's usurped 50 fantasy points. He had 17 and 14 against Minnesota back on the 11th, 4 blocks, 4 assists in that one. 8-6 is a really tough pill to swallow, though, and if you haven't been using him, getting there on that is going to be a little bit tougher. So he's a luxury play. Michigan State does have the front court bodies to at least get him into foul trouble. They have the guards to, drive the lane. So I'm a little bit leery about using him, but I do like him long term, and I think he's phenomenal. Peyton Sandford would be my preferred play for 600 less at 8K. He has been more of the alpha, or he's been the alpha more often than not, I should say. Tony Perkins is priced at 7.9. I think that's a sneaky price. People don't normally use Perkins, but he's been fantastic this year. And then you have Josh Dix, who is a value consideration at 4.9. Ben Krikke at 5.9 is not usually on my list. And then you have a value piece in Patrick McCaffrey, who's sitting there at 4.7. Played 20 minutes against Wisconsin, only 4 fantasy points. That number is low. Fantasy point per minute number is minuscule, but sub 5K, we know he's at least going to get 20 minutes. There may or may not be some nepotism going on there, but he did just put up 28 against Minnesota 3 games ago. So there is potential upside there in the right spot. Going up against Michigan State, I do think McCaffrey's a little sneaky. He's not going to be drawing any of their tougher defenders whatsoever, but the Spartans do have a ton of individual harassers for on-ball defenders. McCaffrey is going to have to be ready to shoot because he's not going to be creating anything for himself, which does limit him a little bit. All right, moving right along, we'll go to BC and FSU. Hey, Boscat, what is up, my man? Thank you so much for the kind words. You don't know what it means to me. I really appreciate it. Thanks for this, bro. No one else does CBB DFS. You are appreciated. Subscribe. All right. Hey, thanks, man. I really, really do appreciate the kind words there. We're doing the best we can. As we get into March, we're going to start doing 4 shows a week, and then the conference tournament week, and obviously the tournament itself, we'll be doing shows every single day. So I'll have some special guests for that entire week. Some that are with FTN, like Mike Huttrey, Ace Stills, a couple others, and some that aren't. Maybe you remember from RG, my man John Schiller, Varnicus, who I talk to every day. That's my boy. Trying to talk him into doing a show with us. He's semi-retired from content, but I think we might be able to get him on for one of these shows here in March. All right, so FSU versus BC. The Seminoles are 4.5-point favorites. Total of 151. Pretty decent total here. Florida State is a team that I continue to tell people like they're pretty sneaky defensively. They're 58th per Ken Palm defensive efficiency. They do play at the 38th fastest tempo. Offensively, they're fairly challenged, but they have done enough to stifle a lot of teams, and especially other teams' alphas. That game against Duke that they just lost, Jared McCain shot ridiculous, 8 of 11 from long range. Jeremy Roach had a big game. Kyle Filipkowski was completely shut down. They forced him into 6 turnovers, and he had 4 fouls. So if McCain and Roach hadn't shot ridiculously well, more McCain than Roach, there was a good chance they shut Duke down and won that game, meaning they kept Duke below 70, 65, 70 points and gutted that one out. But McCain the freshman just was ridiculous. Then you go back and you look at a game like Virginia Tech. They did a nice job containing those secondary options. Now, Sean Padula turned the ball over a ton. He ended up with 19 points, but that was because he shot 14 of 16 from the foul line. There was a lot of fouling going on late in that game, and he was racking up points that way. It wasn't the best game for him otherwise. Hunter Couture hit 4 threes, didn't contribute a lot elsewhere. And then Tyler Nickel, who's went nuts tonight. Tyler Nickel's been like 3 or 4 straight games in a row. We got to start recognizing Tyler Nickel for what he is. Fantastic player all of a sudden. He played well, 15 points against them because he had 3 or 4 from the 3-point range. They've seemingly running into these red-hot performances from long range. And Lynn Kidd did have 12 points and over 14 rebounds against them. So he did pretty well against FSU overall, but I do believe that this team is very, very tough defensively. They held Armando Bacot to 5 and 4. They did hold Cormac Ryan to 10 points. They're just a very big problem to deal with, and I am worried about Boston College here. Ken Pom has it 78-74 in favor of FSU. Now, they don't have a ton of individual DFS performers that we really want to get too excited about. Coach Hamilton doesn't have the depth that he's had in previous years, but he is still trying. He's playing a ton of guys. Right now, we're seeing Jameer Watkins as the alpha. He is priced appropriately at 7-9, so he's not exactly a top flight play. I think he's a guy that kind of coasts right in at 30, 31 fantasy points, so he's certainly playable, but there is an opportunity cost there, and I think there are other spots in the slate we could target instead. Baba Miller, he's there at 5'6". He's just so challenged offensively. I've wanted him to be a thing for over a year now. I kind of liked him against Duke, and he did play some pretty strong minutes, but he ended up fouling out in 19, did score just over 16 fantasy points. He's hit 20 just once in his last 5, really difficult. I would imagine he gets into some big foul trouble here against this BC front court, so it's tough for me to get too involved with him. You do have some cheap prices on guys like Darren Green, who has struggled to find his shot, but he is good for 20-plus fantasy points at that 5.2 price. Maybe a little bit of a safer option there to put into your lineup. His minutes have been pretty solid. If you put him at around 31, 32, I think he coasts right in there at 4X. And then you have a little bit of interesting options, somebody like a Cam Corhen, who has been playing more minutes recently as the conference season goes on. He was very good against Duke, 14 points, 9 rebounds, high watermark this season of 26. So I think he's okay if you want to use him at 5'4", and he's going to definitely be a problem for Q post there, and there's going to be some foul trouble for one of those two guys. On the BC side, Quentin Post, he's back up to a higher price here at 8.5. 3 of his last 4, he's been over 37 fantasy points. Last time they played FSU, it was a 63-62 loss, but Post had 12 rebounds, 21 points, and 45 fantasy points. So he definitely did well, but now they're going to be at Florida State. A little bit worried about him here on the road and his penchant for getting into foul trouble. He's definitely on my list, but he's not a core play for me, and I am going to be looking at some of the other pay-ups, definitely. He's not a fade by any means, but it is definitely a one of those luxuries that if I can find a way to get there without sacrificing the rest of my build, I will, but I'm not going to be starting there. I do really like Claudell Harris at 6'8". He's one that I think is going to be a much better DFS play than people realize. I don't imagine him being above like 5-6%, something like that. But if you take a look in his logs and see the amount of shots he's taken, how engaged he's been, and the minutes that are now trending back up. You might remember he lost his starting gig for a little while there as they were starting Chaz Kelly. Prince Olegbe was in and out with an injury. Devin McLaughlin is starting to step up. But overall, Claudell Harris, who was a absolute machine for Charleston Southern the last 2 years, coming off the bench, started to outplay the starters, and then he's back in the starting lineup. So the three of his last games, he has been starting 30 minutes, 37, and 31. He did score 13, 20, and 15 real points in each of those games while taking a total of 35-plus shots. He has been has taken 10-plus shots in 5 straight games as well. The 6'8", it's just high enough to maybe like push people away. They're going to look at that and automatically write him off. But I do think this spot for him here against FSU is strong. He wasn't as great against them. He only shot 3 of 11 last time, but that volume is there, and he does project fairly well for me, at least initially pre-minutes edits on my sheet. This is Jaden Zachary at 6'7" and Devin McLaughlin at 6'6". Both of those guys have to be in consideration just because they play such a big role here. But again, I don't love Jaden Zachary on the road. He has been really strong, 29-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4, which includes 1 against FSU. But I do worry about him. This is a spot where I feel like he's going to be turnover prone, and he does have a bit of a hacking issue in close games. I have noticed that, at least in conference play. The Mason Madsen play, he had been very good for us. We've been using him as a value, 4.3, 4.8, 4.9, 5.4. Now he's priced at 6.3 because he has played so well. That 38 fantasy point performance against Miami that they had over the weekend, that has caused his price to balloon all the way to 6.3. He did have 22 against FSU in their last meeting, but that major price increase is going to be tough. I don't think we can use him here. They bunched all of the BC guys up after post to kind of water it down there. But I think that Harris and Zachary are your top 2, and then somewhere behind McLaughlin is Mason Madsen. Chaz Kelly, Prince Oligby, those plays are not getting the minutes. Seems they're playing their starters, huge minutes at this rate. So you want to kind of stick to that starting 5 for BC if you decide to go that direction. All right, next game on the slate, Syracuse versus NC State. Total of 151.5. The Wolfpack are 5.5-point favorites. Getting to Syracuse, there's some rumors that Judah Mintz is atop Ed Cooley's want list here, with the transfer portal being so crazy and that COVID year is about to fall off. I think there's one more season for players that'll have the extra COVID year. So the transfer portal madness and free agency is going to slow down a tad here, but one more season of craziness, I think. And Ed Cooley, whether he said it or not, it's being talked about that Georgetown wants Judah Mintz. So we'll see. We'll see what happens here. The game against Georgia Tech, tough loss for Cuse over the weekend, 65-60. Malik Brown was fairly awful. Did foul out, 6 points, 8 rebounds, had 5 steals. That is a major source of his fantasy production via steals and blocks. I don't know that that can continue, but he's been putting up some ridiculous stocks numbers. Judah Mintz, we know, one of the highest usage players on the team, going to play every minute. His peripherals have died, and he's been losing some of that scoring, which he was the alpha in, to J.J. Starling and Chris Bell. Chris Bell bricked hard and kind of fell back down to earth. We didn't think he could keep going off like he did. He finally didn't against Georgia Tech, but he and J.J. Starling have been a major reason why Judah Mintz's overall upside has taken a hit recently. They're still starting Justin Taylor, but he's playing less and less minutes as Quadir Copeland comes off the bench and plays more and more minutes. So there is a couple of plays here for Syracuse that you can at least consider. None of them too exciting. You have to respect this Wolfpack defense. Brown at 7.8 and Mintz at 8.4. They're both playable, but secondary options. Quadir Copeland is the one I actually like the best at 6K, despite coming off the bench. I think he has the kind of versatility and athleticism that can do well against this Wolfpack team. And with that defensive focus going to be on Mintz, Starling, some of these other guys, he's going to have some of the weaker part of the defense. J.J. Starling there at 6.2 as well. All these guys, again, they're bunched in here at the same price, 6K, 6.1 for Bell, 6.2 for Starling. I do prefer Copeland the most out of that group. All right. For NC State, they've gone through several changes in their starting lineup. It's been up and down. Early in the season, the youngsters like Dennis Parker, we saw a ton of minutes for him. He kind of hit a wall. Minutes have gone by the wayside. Also, went to the bench. The last game there that NC State gutted out a 78-77 win over a tough Clemson team. They ran an extremely short rotation of just 8 guys. The starting 5 of DJ Horn, our man, Mo Diarra, Casey Morsell, Michael O'Connell, and DJ Burns. Off the bench, we saw Ben Middlebrooks. That was a revenge spot for him against Clemson, by the way. Jaden Taylor, who came off the bench and played 19 minutes but had a 30% usage rate. And Breon Pass, who just played the 2 minutes. So we've, again, have seen them change up their starting lineup several times here. Jaden Taylor, who had been a starter for a long time, did not get that start, played 19 minutes, but he was fairly solid there against Clemson. We'll see what happens there if he gets back into the starting lineup or not. Mo Diarra has been a guy they've needed to get more consistent minutes and put him in a position to succeed. He was fantastic against Clemson, 11 points, 9 rebounds, 2 blocks, 3 steals. Second game in a row that he eclipsed 30 fantasy points. Again, Mo Diarra has needed to be a starter for quite some time. I'm happy that he started, maybe not at the expense of Jaden Taylor, but I am very, very happy to see him play these big minutes. And regardless of what price Diarra is now, which is 5.7 currently, if he continues to be a starter with his rates, he is absolutely in play in all formats. If he is going to be getting 34 minutes and staying out of foul trouble, especially, we're talking about a guy who is projecting like slate breakingly well. I can't honestly deliver the sheet to the Discord tomorrow with 34 minutes next to his name. I would love to. I'll probably be somewhere between 25 and 26, kind of conservatively. But at 34 minutes, the projections have Diarra at like 6.2x. Again, I'm not going to deliver it that way, but that just shows you how fantastic his rates are. And if he is on the court playing 30 plus minutes, he's fantastic. And he's one of those plays, again, his price is up, just kind of like Claudel Harris, 6'8". People are going to they're going to walk away from that. I think people are going to look at Diarra at almost 6K and they're going to walk away from that. If he doesn't start, I think it's a little bit of a tougher pill to swallow. But if he continues to be a starter, yes, I think we have to keep rolling him out there. Do like DJ Burns always at 6'1", but he's rarely a main team conglomerate for us. Do feel like Jaden Taylor, if he gets back in the starting lineup, only 5'5", you have to give him strong consideration. Michael O'Connell's there at 4'8", Casey Morsell at 5'7". Cheap options, not exciting. DJ Horn at 8'3". He's the luxury play of the group, but he does project well over 34 fantasy points. So he's okay if you do have the salary to pay up for him, but more of a secondary look just because I'd rather take some of these cheapies from Mo Diarra or perhaps Jaden Taylor. And we'll see if Dennis Parker is back in the mix here. A DMP, that's never good. He's been under 10 minutes in 3 of his last 4. There'll be a hard summer workouts for Parker, and he'll be back strong next season for us. But right now, we just can't use him. All right, next game, UConn versus Creighton. This is a really big betting opportunity, I think. The total is 145. UConn is 3-point favorites. It is on the road, but Creighton defensively, they are, they're top 24 in defensive efficiency, but we have seen them give up some huge point totals to some very, very mediocre offenses and really huge point totals to some amazing offenses. Granted, they've been involved in a ton of overtime games and conference play, but going up against this UConn team, they lost 62-48 on the road at the Gamble Pavilion. Now they're going to be on their floor. I think Connecticut wins by 6+ points relatively easy. So -3 is no problem for me. At this point, the start of the season and during last summer's preview shows, I had mentioned UConn is the title window's open. This is the team to beat. People are going to be, Kansas is so great. Kentucky is so great. Look at Purdue. Look at Houston. But Connecticut's the team people needed to be talking about. Yes, they lost a huge chunk of that title winning team, but they still have a phenomenal amount of returners from that group and a freshman class spearheaded by Stephen Castle that was just phenomenal, and a fearless transfer from Rutgers and Cam Spencer that has the most swagger of anyone. Reminds me so much. You guys remember, I think it was Ole Miss many, many years ago. I got to look it up now because I don't want to be wrong about the year, but it's Marshall Henderson. If you guys don't know Marshall Henderson from Ole Miss, I don't remember when he played for them, like mid 2000s, I think, mid 2010, 2015, something like that. But Marshall Henderson, just like the lankiest dude on the court, doesn't look tough, but hits, like once the game starts, hits tough shots, shushes the road crowd, talks shit to the other team's coaches, the other players, like just trash talking galore, and like a really, everybody talking about it as as the tournament was coming up that year, and how Henderson's the most hated personality. Spencer's not there like him, but he has a lot of Marshall Henderson like vibes, and I personally love that villainous type of attitude that players have. I know some people find it very unbecoming, but I am a 90s kid, and I absolutely love that kind of trash talk. Growing up with Reggie Miller, you kind of have to. So this Connecticut team's great. I think they're gonna stonewall Creighton a little bit. Conservatively, I'm saying it should be like a -6, but if they win by double digits, is anybody going to be surprised? And Creighton has a phenomenal group of players in their starting lineup, but they have no bench. If anybody gets into foul trouble, Kalkbrenner, Alexander, Shireman, Ashworth, who struggled with fouls in their previous matchup, they just don't have the depth. They're going to have to bring Farabello in for big minutes. Isaac Trout, like those guys are not going to be able to handle UConn. And UConn has guys off the bench in Samson Johnson and Hassan Diarra that can hold their own quite well. But the starting five of UConn is just going to be belligerently, and I say belligerently, good. They just walloped Marquette 81-53. An absolute dismantling. The way that they shut down Tyler Kolek should be eye-opening for people who don't understand how good this UConn team is. Cam Jones hit a bunch of shots, so he finally looked good. Oso Ighodaro, they kept him in check on the boards. David Joplin and Stevie Mitchell, non-factors. Ben Gold, Chase Ross off the bench, non-factors. It was just a defensive masterpiece by the Huskies, and I don't think we're going to be able to target against them much anymore. You can add them to the list of Houston and Iowa State, Virginia, although unless you're Tyler Nickel, Connecticut's just a team that you can't really look to target against them. And I know that's tough because Creighton has really three guys that have been basically cheat codes all season long, but these prices are high. Baylor Shireman's almost 10K. As good as he's been, are we paying 10K against UConn? I don't know, 8-4 for Kalkbrenner. That's technically a little bit cheap for him, but this matchup against Klingon and company is tough. You have Trey Alexander at 8-6. Again, going to play every minute, but how good is he going to turn out? Ashworth at 6-5 against UConn. Nope, absolutely zero chance of that. There's just no way you can get me to pay these prices for Creighton guys. And maybe it ends up hurting me, but the fact of the matter is they were held to 48 points in their first matchup. Shireman 12-6, Trey Alexander 6-3, Ryan Kalkbrenner 11-8. He did have 5 blocks, did stay out of foul trouble, but this UConn team is just the real deal. So that means we want to consider Connecticut guys. If we're not using Creighton, we want to definitely use UConn, and especially if this game turns out to be close and we're getting 37, 38 minutes from guys like Tristan Newton, Cam Spencer, Alex Karaban, then yeah, we certainly want to be targeting multiple UConn guys. And UConn mini stacks have been the absolute juice all season long. 7-1 for Karaban. Love it. 6-5 for Castle. He's cheap. He's not a main team play, but he's definitely in consideration for alts. Cam Spencer is a little bit higher at 7-7, but he has been so locked in for 30-plus fantasy points time and time again. You are getting a little bit of a higher price at 8-5 on Newton, but he is a pay-up that I'm considering. And then Donovan Klingon at 8-1. Foul trouble for one of Kalkbrenner or Klingon probably. I think it would actually be Klingon, not Kalkbrenner, just because of the way that he plays, but they have the deeper roster and they can handle it if Klingon does get himself into a degree of foul trouble here, so I'm not exactly worried about it. Newton put up 41 in a blowout against Marquette, but the key there was he played 32 minutes, and that was one thing that I had talked about leading into that game. Newton was priced at 8-2, and that's slate. In these kind of semi-blowouts to actual blowouts, he was playing around 29, 30 minutes. We needed to get him up over 32 into the 35s if possible. That's really when the upside starts to, blow through the ceiling. And that's what we saw against Marquette there in 32 minutes, 8 assists, 8 rebounds, 15 points for 41. So that's why you're seeing the score there. But again, I do prefer Cam Spencer, who's a little bit cheaper, $800 less at 7-7. And you see even a bad game, quote unquote, for Cam Spencer, 28.75 fantasy points. So he's just so safe That's why I prefer him. I do like Caravan. He's a little less safe. He does have a higher floor, but upside is there. Blowout really did hurt him. There wasn't as much usage for him. Shots were down. But again, if we end up with a little bit of a closer battle here, Caravan makes a lot of sense. Probably will target more of his props there. I don't know if I'm going to go full UConn stack in my main for this slate, but I'm definitely going to be using one of Spencer or Caravan. Right now, I'm leaning towards Cam Spencer. All right, next game on the slate. What's up, EJ? NC State. I don't have any faith in Syracuse right now. And if Mo Diarra is starting, it's NC State all day. All right, Maryland versus Wisconsin. Not very excited about this game. Wisconsin's 7-point favorites. Don't know about that, but maybe. Maryland has been absolutely dreadful. Total of 130.5. Don't expect a lot of rostership here. Wisconsin dropping the OT game there recently to Iowa. Stephen Crowell was magnificent. Looking at it here, AJ Storr at 6'4", Stephen Crowell at 7'4", and Tyler Wall at 7K. You also have Chucky Hepburn up here at 7'2". So all of the Wisconsin guys are priced up pretty highly after that overtime game against Iowa, with a lot of them dominating. Now, Crowell has put up 30-plus fantasy points in back-to-back games, but that has caused his price to skyrocket back into that 7K range. Pretty hard for me to go there. I don't love paying 7.2 for Hepburn ever. 30 against Ohio State, 42 against Iowa. The fact of it is Hepburn has a lot of empty minutes. He does put up some pretty solid stats. Overall has decent rates, but you're rarely going to see him hit that high water mark of 42 plus. The 7.2 price is way out of whack for me. The only guy I would consider for my main would be AJ Storr, but he's a little bit of a more middling play here too, because even though Maryland's been bad, they make games ugly for everyone. So not only are they struggling, but they're making their opponents struggle as well. And we're seeing a lot of rock fights here. It's okay to target peripheral-oriented guys or more physical players, but scoring dominant type players are just not going to be good in an environment like this. So Storr probably not the best look, even though I do prefer him if you are going to use somebody from the Badgers. Max Klesmit is technically a value, 4.7, 39 minutes against Iowa in the overtime, 32 against Ohio State. After shooting just ridiculously above his head back in, early to mid-January, he was putting up 30s, which was like, what? He hasn't been putting up those type of performances. He's been shooting awful. 2 of 10 against Iowa, 1 of 7 against Rutgers. He is very scoring reliant. Did have 8 assists against Iowa. That's a little bit uncharacteristic for him, but at 4.7, if we believe he's going to play 30-ish minutes, and he should, he's at least in the conversation. Maryland, Jahmir Young, he's just super expensive for this matchup at 8.9. We saw him struggle in the first half against Iowa, frustrating. The very next slate against Illinois, he puts up a 50 bomb. That's just Jahmir Young. He's a high usage, high volume guy that can put up a ton of stats and score in a hurry. And his rebounding has been just ridiculous, especially the last few games of conference play. 12 rebounds against a tough Rutgers interior, 7 against Ohio State, 9 against Illinois. If he's rebounding like that, in addition to his already elite scoring, he is a total slate breaker, and 8.9 is actually probably underpriced for him. But this type of rock fight environment worries me. I feel like his scoring is going to take a dip. Perhaps the newfound rebounding ability that he has shown makes up for it. And I will probably have some GPP exposure there to Young because, again, his rates are phenomenal. But this would be more of a secondary luxury play that we're just not starting our lineup with. Top 30 in usage rate, top 50 in shot rate, top 100 assist rate, 9th highest free throw percentage, and he's shooting about 35% from long range. You also have Julian Reese. He has been a rock solid play. I think if you want to use anybody on Maryland, he probably makes the most sense. Now, I'm always nervous about him in foul trouble, especially on the road. He played a whopping 49 minutes against Ohio State in the extra period game there. 13 points, 13 rebounds, put up a solid 36, kept himself out of foul trouble for the most part. He ended up with 4 in that game, but that was across 49 minutes. Very good. I am just very worried, especially with the way we're running on fouls, of taking him here on the road and being served with a, quick 2 fouls but that 8-2 price for him does feel advantageous here against Wisconsin. So I don't mind using him, and I wouldn't blame anyone for doing so. Just be prepared for possible disaster if he does get into foul trouble. But if he plays 35 minutes, no problem. I think he does make value relatively easy. Now, the rest of Maryland, 3-7, Jamie Kaiser, 3-4, Jahari Long. You have these value pieces who are in and out of the starting lineup. It's really hard to trust any of them. Jamie Kaiser has played 29 plus minutes in back-to-back games, but he is such a low volume guy, and he fouls like crazy. He had 2 fouls in like 28 seconds against Rutgers, completely ruined his game there as a starter. As long as Jordan Geronimo continues to deal with this knee issue, which he played, against Iowa, re-aggravated it, didn't play the next game. His status is murky at best here. So we're going to see Kaiser continue to play these minutes, but I just don't know, even at 3-7, if we can utilize him. Throw him into some GPP lineups for that salary flexibility, but even at that price, you just can't use him in a main because he's not hitting 10-plus fantasy points ever. And that's pretty disappointing for me because I wanted Kaiser to be a thing. It is worth talking about the Frosh Deshaun Harris-Smith, who has been really playing well the last few games, especially after losing his starting spot. He did jump back in the starting lineup there against Illinois and played worse, but he still took 11 shots, had 18.5 fantasy points. It wasn't a horrible game for him. He's priced at 5-2. He was dominant against Iowa, 17-6-3. 41 minutes in that game against Ohio State, and we're starting to see him maybe settle down a little bit. He went through his freshman wall, a little bit of struggles, had to go to the bench. Now he's back in the starting lineup, played 35 minutes against Illinois. I'm definitely looking at Harris-Smith at 5-2 as a guy that can be in our player pool, and I think it's safe to go back in the water with Deshaun Harris-Smith. Donta Scott, 6K. I'm rarely ever rostering him. If he beats me, I'm kind of just okay with it. He's just never an option for me. If his price got into the low 5K range, then I'd be much more interested. What's up? I did not, no. But we can definitely do so at the end here. It's not on the slate, but that was one of the games that I had kind of hinted at, like not being on the slate, but probably should have, because West Virginia games are fantasy gold mine. But at the end here, we'll pull up the line and take a look at it. All right, Texas Tech versus TCU. Tech is 5.5-point favorites, total of 147.5. That feels low. I think this game sails over. I think we're talking about a game played into the 70s, 80s for both. This is not the Chris Beard Texas Tech squad of yesteryear. Grant McCaslin has done a phenomenal job with this Tech team. They're about 65th in defensive efficiency per Ken Palm, but offensive efficiency is 13th. They have been strong. Now, they did lose 82-74 to Iowa State, and you just saw Iowa State struggle to get anything going against Houston tonight, but that just shows you this Texas Tech defense is not it. Tech does have a short rotation potentially. They've got plenty of options here that we want to talk about. Warren Washington missed the last game dealing with a foot issue, and he's considered highly questionable for this one. If he's not able to go, you're talking about a 7-man rotation for Texas Tech at best. In that game against Iowa State, Darion Williams, Joe Toussaint both played 37 minutes. Robert Jennings got into the starting lineup and played 29 minutes as a value. He was very good, 13-5. Pop Isaacs dealt with foul trouble all game long, so he only had 28 minutes. Kerwin Walton had to play 26. Then we saw Chance McMillan play 31 minutes off the bench, and Kyron Lindsey played 11 minutes off the bench, scored 6 points, 4 rebounds. So if no Warren Washington, we have value here in Robert Jennings, whose price did go up after a really strong 21 fantasy point performance to 5K, but without Washington, that 5K still has to be considered a value spot. He played 20 minutes the game before that against Kansas and had 16, so I'm definitely on board with using Jennings. I think he's probably one of the better values on the slate if Washington is out. You look at his rating or his rates, 22.2% usage rate, 19.5% shot rate. He has an elite rebounding rate, 29% combined, has a strong physicality about him. He's only 6'7", but he is very good on the glass. Doesn't have the highest rebounding rate, draws the highest block rate, but he does play with a level in the pain of confidence that it's inexplicable, but I really like Robert Jennings, and I think he's actually going to turn out to be quite good next year. So additional minutes might be here to stay regardless of Warren Washington's status, and the foot injury is bothering him enough that even if Washington plays, he's probably limited. We might see a situation in which he plays 20 minutes. Robert Jennings plays 20 minutes as well. He does have a high foul rate, 5.5 per 40, so something to be aware about there with Robert Jennings. Perhaps if that were to happen, Kyron Lindsey would become more viable. Now he's almost min price. He's there at 3.3. He did pay off in 11 minutes. He had 12.5 fantasy points at 3K. Now you're talking about 3.3. If Washington's out, I don't mind it. It's not a main team play. It's very thin. He has awful rates. His fantasy point per minute number is low, but he's also not gotten much of an opportunity. We're seeing him for a minute, 2 minutes. He doesn't play a lot. So it's to be expected. He hasn't done much with 10 plus minutes at min price in a matchup against TCU. He's in consideration. They have no other bench options. Kerwin Walton at 4.7 as a starter, reliant on his scoring. He was productive there for about a month. Now he's fallen back to his normal career averages. Hard to really want to use him. I think the sneaky play here would be Chance McMillan. Doesn't start, but I think we'd see him play 30 plus minutes. Now, a lot of that had to do with the fact that Pop was in foul trouble, especially in that middle of the first half, which is why those minutes kind of spiked. But I think you see him in that 27 to 28 range, which is definitely viable at a price point like this. Joey Toussaint at 6K, love him. Favorite play on the team. That's just way too cheap for no bench matchup against TCU. That's favorable. So I'm going to be using a lot of Joey T. Pop at 6.3 is also a very strong play. He hasn't been above 30 fantasy points in 6 straight, which is kind of tough, but I think you see him have an opportunity to pop off here. Last time they played TCU, he shot 8 of 18, 5 of 11 from deep, 25 real points, 9 assists on his way to 48 fantasy points. So he did very, very well in their last meeting. And then you got to mention Darion Williams, who is 7.4 and is at a price point where people have ignored him. And he hasn't been, this has not been a chalk play all year long. He hung 57 on Kansas, and that was the day that he projected really well on our sheet, but I didn't buy into it. Wish I had. Followed that up after 30 points, 11 rebounds with a 12.11 rebound game against Iowa State for 33. He's actually scored 30 plus in 3 straight, and he's had 3 straight double-doubles. So he's well worth this price of 7.4, and he's continuing to crack. He wasn't good against TCU last time. He was mired with foul trouble. He is so active that he does pick up fouls and has a higher than you probably realize foul rate. But overall, Darion Williams is playing really, really well. No Lamar Washington, possibly no Warren Washington. We'll see what this happens here, but Texas Tech with a very, very thin bench means 6-7 guys are going to play a ton of minutes. Last time, it was an 85-78 victory for TCU. Chance McMillan, Warren Washington, and Pop Isaacs all had fantastic games. Trevion Tennyson on the TCU side scored 23 on 4 of 8 shooting from long range. Micah Peavy had 18, 5, and 4. And we saw Emmanuel Miller with 11 and 5. Off the bench, Jacoby Coles had 12. Speaking of TCU, I really like Jacoby Coles, even though he's 5'2". Now, he only played 13 minutes against KSU, which was tough. He will require foul trouble to get those minutes upwards, but he did put up 23 against West Virginia in 22 minutes. He has solid rates, higher usage rate. He is somebody that is in the conversation here, especially if Warren Washington can't go. They're thin up front. There's a lot of rim protection gone. That opens things up. Coles could have a very nice night, but he will need those minutes. Trevion Tennyson at 5'6". He's kind of fallen off lately. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Jameer Nelson got back in the starting lineup. That takes usage and shots right out of Tennyson's hands. Nelson at 5'8", started the last 2 games, hit the game winner there against K-State over the weekend. Had the massive game against West Virginia, 3 steals, 4 blocks, which spiked his fantasy points to nearly 40. He's definitely a viable option at 5'8", especially if he continues to start. Off the bench against Tech last time, 10 points, 3 assists, 2 steals, 24.5 fantasy points. We take that at 5'8". So he's definitely my favorite TCU play overall in a vacuum, as they say, when you factor in price, starting lineup possibilities, and overall matchup. Micah Peavy at 7.3. He put up 52 against Kansas State. That's too high for me personally. There is a lot of volatility with that number. So if people want to chase that, I will let them. I would rather go to Nelson or perhaps slide down to Emmanuel Miller, who has been steady, not breaking the slate or anything like that. Upside has been questionable, but this is a spot where he's going to have to answer the call. We're looking at 35 plus minutes for Emmanuel Miller at sub 10% rostership. He is worth having some exposure to by far. Looking at it, top projected, Jameer Nelson and Emmanuel Miller. Go figure. Jacoby Coles, 20 minutes near 4X. So just an example there. All right, next game on the slate, we are talking Baylor versus BYU. BYU 4-point favorites, total of 155. So this is the highest on the slate, which typically means people, especially the more casual player or the non-CBB grinder, they tend to look at those totals and they go and stack up that highest total. BYU is a bit of a tricky team. They're deep, very, very deep, and they're getting healthy, which is not helping that depth. We're seeing a 9-10 man rotation of 19 plus minutes for all. Right now, Fusani Traore, who has the upside as good as anyone, but got bumped out of the starting lineup with the returning Ali Khalifa. He started against West Virginia, played 31 minutes, broke the slate. Started against Oklahoma, played 29 minutes, semi-broke the slate, and then came off the bench the last 3 games, 20 minutes, 11, and 21. But still, even in 20 minutes against K-State, 14-8, 21 minutes against Oklahoma State, 17-4. He was awful against UCF because he only played 11 minutes, and UCF's defense is nails. So it's kind of rough. It's really not easy to roster Traore as a bench player. As a starter, you can definitely do it, but he's priced at 6.8. So high fantasy point per minute number, fantastic rates. I can't get behind using him unless he's starting. There are just far too many other options in the front court with Khalifa getting those minutes. Noah Waterman back up over 30 the last couple. There's just too many bodies here on this BYU squad, and their guards are quite crowded as well. Jackson Robinson, who had been starting, I was waiting for that shoe to drop. Trevin Nell, who missed a couple games, been playing off the bench, really figured he was going to be back starting. He did. Jackson Robinson off the bench, still played 28 minutes. Trevin Nell as a starter played 27. Then you have Dallin Hall and Spencer Johnson along with Richie Saunders. So there's just all these different options for BYU that you can utilize. Jackson Robinson at 5'9". I prefer him as a starter. He doesn't need to be a starter. He's actually probably better as a second unit guy, but those minutes can be a little bit wonky there. Have to like Spencer Johnson, who's priced at only 5'9". He was very, very mediocre against Oklahoma State, but he is somebody that typically plays above 30 minutes. Might get watered down a little bit because of Jackson Robinson and Trevin Nell's reemergence, but that's a great price for him as somebody who has had multiple big slate-breaking type of performances in the past. Trevin Nell is the guy that I like the most, 5'4". Again, waiting for him to get back in the starting lineup. He has started the last 3. He missed the game back in mid-January against Iowa State and then was playing like 13 to 17 minutes while he recovered. As a starter against K-State in 24 minutes, he still struggled, 10 points, 1 rebound, but he scored 17 points, 4 rebounds off the bench or as a starter against UCF in 27 minutes, and then Oklahoma State 16, 2 and 2 in 27 minutes, 23% usage rate in each of those games. We're talking about a player in Trevin Nell that was over 7K at times this year. Big shot taker. You saw 14 attempts against Oklahoma State. I think he's starting to find his footing again, shaking off whatever injuries and ailments he had. He is certainly main team viable here in this spot, but just keep in mind, this is a extremely deep roster. And still like Richie Saunders, who's only 4'5". Minutes have started to subside as they've gotten healthier, but he's definitely in the conversation as well. And Khalifa as a starter at 5'2". Don't mind him, but I think we have to play it like this Baylor team's going to be getting some guys into foul trouble. Waterman or Khalifa are probably going to be the victims of that, which means Traore might end up seeing some more minutes. And in a closer game like this, they would it would behoove them to play Fusiani, who's one of their best players anyway. So I think Waterman and Khalifa, while cheap and are playable, probably a little bit more on the downside there and not main team consideration just because of the situation. Let's see here. Spencer Johnson, because of his rates at 5'9" and 30 minutes, projects the best for BYU, by the way. Trevin Nell is up there, right around 27 minutes, just at 4X. I value him more than the sheet does, but Spencer Johnson is who projections like right now. On the Baylor side, this is a team with a fairly predictable rotation, which is nice, but the matchup against BYU maybe not the most advantageous or one that we want to target. Top 50 defensive unit, top 10 offensive unit here under Mark Pope. BYU, teams like Houston, BYU, like coming into the Big 12, expecting to get smacked by the masses and media, just hasn't happened. They played really well. The loss to Oklahoma State was bad. That's a really horrific Cowboys team, so they had to shake that off. Home game here against Baylor. Ken Pom has an 80-77. They're going to be ready. The Baylor side, like I said, really easy to predict. We're talking about an 8-man rotation. Ray J. Dennis, Jalen Bridges, Jacoby Walter, Jaden Nunn, all playing majority of the minutes. You have Yves Missy as the starting center there, 7-footer, he's a freshman. A lot of upside, has a bit more. He's a little unpolished, does get into foul issues here, so you're typically going to see him in the mid-20s. Then you get Josh Ujuanu and some everyday John, who's unfortunately a shell of his former self due to injuries, a little Caleb Lohner, and then a little Miro Little. But for the most part, Baylor starting 4 of those 5, which are guards and or wings, will be playing 35-plus minutes. So that means Jacoby Walter at 6'6" is the best overall option on Baylor, the freshman there who's going to go right into the NBA. Be nice if Walter decides to stay another season. 25.6% shot rate, shooting 34% from long range, drawing 5 fouls per 40, just the total package there. Yves Missy, the 7-foot freshman, shooting 65% from the field. Gets a ton of bunnies, as you can imagine. Top 20 in offensive rebounding rate. Top 50 in block rate. Then you have Ray J. Dennis, elite three-point shooter above 41%. Jaden Nunn, 45%. Jalen Bridges, 40%. And Langston Love, when healthy, at 50%. 7th best in the nation. So under Scott Drew, as you can imagine, a Baylor team that shoots a lethal percentage from long range. Langston Love's considered day-to-day. Questionable, has missed the last, I believe, 3 games. We'll see if he gets back into it here, but it sounds like there's a really good chance he misses at least one more, and this matchup against BYU would be awful for him. So even though he's 4'8", and if he were to be ruled back in, I think he's probably not really in consideration. All right, next one here, we have Pittsburgh versus Wake Forest. Wake Forest, 6.5-point favorites, total of 144.5. Wake Forest, man, they have got to get over the hump here because Steve Forbes is a fantastic coach. I don't think he gets enough recognition from people outside of either like what we do with DFS or their fan base or just ACC basketball fans. Top 30 in both offensive and defensive efficiency. They're 16-9. Really worried that they're gonna fall out here. Back-to-back losses on the road, close losses to Duke and Virginia. They needed to take one of those. The home win against NC State was huge. Took care of business against Georgia Tech and Syracuse. Now this home game against Pittsburgh, they cannot afford to drop. Last time they played Pittsburgh back on January 31st, they lost on the road 77-72. Efton Reed had a double-double, 14 and 10. He played 38 minutes, Efton Reed. If Efton Reed's playing 38 minutes here, he's a phenomenal play. Hunter Salas, 22 and 6. Andrew Carr, 10, 3 and 1. Cam Hildreth had 7 rebounds, not fantastic enough. And then Kevin Miller had 11 points. He has been struggling. Damari Monsanto barely played off the bench and nothing else really to speak of. On the Pittsburgh side, our guy, the freshman Carlton Carrington, who we love, 24, 5 and 4. Blake Hitson had 17 and 2, and Ish Leggett off the bench had 22. This was before he got back into the starting lineup. Ish Leggett, who missed a few games. Now we saw him playing off the bench here right now, but it seems like he would be a good bet to get back in the starting lineup. He's playing starter minutes regardless, so it doesn't really matter. All right, on the Wake Forest side, prices are up on guys like Hunter Salas at 7.6. Certainly playable, but that's one of those prices that I'm not going to be plugging him in. If he's the last guy in, sure, but I'm not starting with him. We do have really cheap prices on Boopy, Kevin Miller, and Cam Hildreth, as well as FTN Reed, who's only 6'2". Again, if he's playing 38 minutes here, he's a fantastic play. I question that. I don't think that's going to happen, but anything over 30 makes him a really, really intriguing option. And Andrew Carr at 6'5". You have Damari Monsanto as a technical value option at 4.5. He doesn't start. His minutes have been trending upwards. He played 23 against Duke and 17 against Virginia. You saw he put up 18 and 17 fantasy points, respectively. 14 total shots in those two games, despite the fact that he's played very, very few minutes. So has the green light when he's out there. If he comes out and knocks down 2 or 3 threes, he's going to be basically really close to value, get some rebounds, whatever, but we're talking about a 4 or 5 price point that he doesn't need to do a whole lot. He can put up 16 to 20 fantasy points in the blink of an eye. I think FTN Reed is the best option here. I really like him at 6'2". I think they're probably not going to recognize just how great of a spot this can be for him against this Pittsburgh team. Front court, they have size, but they're very undisciplined and they get into foul trouble. Reed is good at drawing fouls, rim protector, and he controls the glass. So at 6'2", I think he is a main team play for sure. Kevin Miller at 5'7". This is one of those buy low spots. He hasn't been doing particularly well, but it's just such a cheap price for a guy that was above 8K at times or close to it. He was about 7.9, I think was his highest watermark. The last game against Pittsburgh, again, he struggled. He has put up some big numbers since, but there hasn't been a lot of consistency. And I think there's just a dynamic here where Hunter Salas has ascended to the alpha on the team, and it's caused Kevin Miller, who was used to being an alpha last year in the MAC, to go through some struggles here. Same thing for Cam Hildreth. He has to contribute on the offensive end. Peripherals are usually what's going to stand him up. 5.7 is a cheap price for Hildreth, but I think FTN Reed is where I'll go, and then I'll sprinkle the others into some various GBP builds. On the Pittsburgh side, we want to target them. Wake Forest is a favorable matchup. Carlton Carrington, under 7K. He's just not an auto lock by any means, but he's a pretty big play for me. I have been rostering him a lot, probably more than most. There have been some chalkier slates for him, especially when he's priced below 6'5", but 6'8", playing 37, 38 minutes. He's just a very obvious play and somebody that I want to have a pretty sizable amount of exposure to. Playing 82.5% of the minutes. He has a 26% assist rate, 23% usage rate, and a defensive rebounding rate of 17%. He's only shooting 28% from long range on 150 attempts, so the attempts are coming, but he needs to shore that up. His counterpart, Blake Hinson, is shooting 43% from long range, has a 27.7% shot rate, and a combined rebounding rate over 21%. Hinson's had some fairly big games, especially in conference play here. 51 against Louisville, 40 against Virginia. That has caused his price to skyrocket. We're talking about 8.7 for Blake Hinson. As much as I love Blake Hinson and use him quite a bit, I am not at liberty to pay 8.7 for him. There is a lot of downside if he gets into foul trouble, which doesn't happen often, but it does. Or if he shoots like 3 for 15, which has happened in the past as well. 14 of 24 against Louisville is pretty damn good. 11 of 19 against Virginia is pretty damn good. He's taking on these bigger roles, and we're talking about a closer game here that will require him to play 36, 37, 38 minutes. So I get it. It's a great matchup, but damn, that opportunity cost is really tough. When I can get for just about 2K cheaper, Carrington, who has a good chance to match, and if he doesn't, I think from an X value standpoint, he's just going to be a much better play and fit into our lineups much better. So with that being said, it's fine to use Hinson, like 37 minutes. He's putting up probably 32 at worst. Nothing to thumb our nose at, right? But that word, opportunity cost, and Wade Taylor below him, Tristan Newton below him. Would you rather play Blake Hinson over Tristan Newton for more money? Probably not. So thinking that way, and Hinson's been pretty chalky lately, he probably makes a very good contrarian play in the large field and could potentially win you 10K if he's under 10%, and I suspect he will be. Ish Leggett at 6'1", whether he's starting or not, again, he's playing starter minutes. He's a very strong overall option at 6'1", and Jalan Lowe, who did take the starting spot from him at 6'4", playing big minutes, is in consideration as well. Federico, not really in the conversation for me. And Guillermo Diaz-Graham, who has lost all of his minutes after falling out of the starting lineups. He only priced at 4.4. There were times earlier this season where I was paying $6K for Diaz-Graham. Now he's at 4.4, and we're not even using him. Crazy how life comes at you, but he's just in the doghouse right now. So Carrington and Leggett, the best side from Pittsburgh, and Efton Reed. This is a great game for a mini stack. I do foresee overtime in this game's future. San Diego State versus Utah State. Last game on the slate. We're cruising right along. 143.5 total. Utah State 2.5-point favorites. Now, there's a night slate on DK 3-gamer that's featuring all the Mountain West. So if you're a Mountain West lover, that slate is one to check out. Mountain West probably going to get more teams in the tournament than the Pac-12. This is a fantastic overall conference. Now, we're pretty familiar with San Diego State. They've been on the slate a bunch. We know that Jadon Lede is the top overall option. Whenever he's on the slate, he's been underpriced, very, very underpriced for multiple slates now. 4th on the Ken Palm Player of the Year rankings. Bet you didn't know that. He is playing 78.5% of the available minutes as San Diego State team. That's relatively deep. 29.3% usage rate, 26.9% shot rate, combined rebounding rate of 28%, and he is drawing a whopping 7.5 fouls per 40. That's the 11th highest mark in the country, and for good measure, shooting 37% from long range, 30 attempts, but still dangerous enough that if you leave him out there, he will make you pay. Love Jadon Lede. He, again, has been like 8K, 8.2, just way too cheap, and now he's at a price at 8.30. That's still just way too cheap, and I think that there'll be some worry, obviously, on the road because there is foul trouble for him in the past. But the way he's drawing fouls and producing, he's just been so steady. I don't really worry about that. Played 35 minutes against Utah State in their last meeting. They won comfortably 81-67. This was at their place. 6 of 13 from the field, 16 points, and 9 rebounds on his way to 32 fantasy points. He's pretty good and reliable for this 32, 33 fantasy point mark. And until they adjust his price above 8.3, 8.4, 8.5, we're just going to keep churning him out there and rolling him out there. And you see how great, or I've told you how great his fantasy or his fouls per minute number is. You look at his free throw attempts over the last 3 games, 14, 11, and 11. He's just drawing a high number of fouls. Any front court player that tries to check him, Nelly Jr. Joseph for New Mexico, he really struggled. 4 fouls in 14 minutes, couldn't get anything going. Every time he tried to guard Jadon Lede, it was a foul, overdone. J.D. Toppin played better at 18 and 10, but he got into some foul issues when he had to guard him. Isaac Mishula got out there for a few minutes. Sebastian Forsling, they were throwing some bodies there at Lede there, and he was just sitting them all down with fouls. So really tough to go against Jadon Lede right now. Love him. Starting to really like Jay Powell, the Campbell transfer who was rarely used at all through the non-con and barely into the conference season. It was like, why did they bring this guy on? Well, that question has been answered. He has played over 20 minutes in each of the last 5 games, even got into the starting lineup here recently, the game against New Mexico, 3 steals, 7 rebounds, 6 points, 2 assists. He's just a guy that can fill it up in multiple categories. He's a little bit spendy at 5'4" now. Has a higher foul rate. On the road, I'd be a little bit more worried about him, but he's in the player pool, and they are using him next to Lede to do the dirty work on defense, and that is the primary reason you're seeing him there a lot more, and he has done really well in that role. So don't mind Jay Powell at all, especially in some of those alt builds. Special guest appearance by the daughter there. Almost done. Waddell kids running around. What can you do? Other options on the team, all cheap. The SDSU guards are hard to trust. They're just so, for lack of a better term, meh. Reese Waters at 5K. That's a nice price, but Jay Powell starting over him. Lamont Butler at 5 or 5'8". That's interesting. Darian Tremmel and Micah Parrish both at 5'5". So what ends up happening here with the Aztecs guards is you don't start with any of them, but you kind of have this like up to 6K last man in spot to fill, and you can kind of talk yourself into one of these Aztecs guards. Usually Darian Tremmel's good for 20-ish fantasy points. Usually Lamont Butler's good for 20-ish fantasy points. Reese Waters, who was in a very strong position in the non-con with this team, has kind of fallen out of the pecking order, still getting minutes, but his rates have tumbled, and offensively, he's not shooting particularly well. His peripherals have also taken a fat hit with Jay Powell around. So the 5K price for Waters, he actually projects at about 3.8x, which is fairly solid, and I think he's actually playable, but I am worried about his role right now with San Diego State healthy and so many mouths on the team suddenly, available and having to be fed. And then Micah Parrish at 5'5", stop me if you heard this before, but another guy who can get you about 20-ish. So none of them are particularly exciting, but I don't hate the idea of using one of those sub 6K options if you need a last man in type of play and you don't want to rework the rest of your lineup. I'm good there. But Lede is obviously the priority. For Utah State, you have the 9K Great Osabor. He is just an absolute dud, like just dude. When his fresh, so I have a story about Great Osabor. I believe it was his freshman year. Either his freshman year or last year. I can't even remember now, but he went off. Let's see. We can figure it out real quick. All right. So I had to face him in one of the Mania matchups, and he was mostly a bench guy, put up some good stats here or there, but seemingly out of nowhere, he puts up a 30-plus fantasy point performance in his first game starting. Like he had started 2 games last year, and one of them happened to be in the tournament. And 11 points, 7 rebounds, 3 blocks, 2 steals, and assists. Like, what the hell is this guy, and why am I losing mania to this guy? And now looking at the steps he's made this year, transfers, follows this guy to Utah State, no longer in the shadow of Ray Battle, and just monumentally one of the best overall players in a very star-heavy league now in Mountain West, and he's got an argument to be the Mountain West Player of the Year. 27.6% usage rate, 22.2% shot rate, combined rebounding rate over 30%, block rate over 5%, draws 7 fouls per 40. Love the way Great Osabor plays. He is a bit spendy at 9K, but you can definitely get there because of those strong peripherals. Now, he doesn't shoot threes at all, and that is something that's a bit of a hamstring there. But he is a guy that I think kind of cruises into 4X. He had 34 against SDSU in their first matchup, plays just about every minute available. Even when he gets into foul trouble, they find ways to keep him in the game. That is one thing that I appreciate about them. He's definitely a guy that we can use. And if we are able to, choke down some of the, mediocre value that's available, Great Osabor is a really nice lineup baker if you want to go there. The other 3, Darius Brown, Mason Falseb, and Ian Martinez, they're kind of a quartet. Those are the 4 guys on this team that you can look at and all have very strong overall rates and are factors when it comes to fantasy production. Darius Brown has a 30% assist rate, plays 89% of the available minutes, which is 31st highest in the country. Ian Martinez shooting 41% from long range, and Mason Falseb, who is a strong shooter in his own right, 31% from long range, has a top 100 true shooting percentage and a 3% steal rate. Now, Ian Martinez transferred over from Maryland, spent time at Utah early in his career, mostly just a role player type guy, but he has turned himself into such a key figure for this Utah State team, shooting 47% in conference games. He's the number 1 3-point shooter in the Mountain West as of this moment right now. So there are a myriad of options here on Utah State that are interesting. Great Osabor is nice because he has guard forward eligibility. Brown, as Mike Couturier has said, is one of the most underrated and best guards out there in the country. Ian Martinez, who wasn't worth it in Maryland at 4.5, but he is at 6K here for Utah State. And then Mason Falsev, who I feel has a very bright future, has shown flashes. Not a main team play, but makes sense for GPPs. Had a pretty solid 16-5 performance against SDSU in their first matchup. All right, that is the slate. Let's get into core, and then we'll revisit anything that you guys want to finish up on. Like the West Virginia game. All right, so right now I'm going to give a 3-man core. And it's going to come with a caveat. So it'll be 3-man core +1 if. The +1 if is Mo Diarra. If he starts, he's going in. So already plan on using him if he's a starter. Otherwise, core play number 1 has to come from Texas A&M, and there's great options from Wade Taylor to Tyrese Radford to Solo Washington. Now, I have the testicular fortitude to core Solo Washington, but because of the foul risk, just know I'm going to have a lot of him, but I am going to go over to that 8.2 price for Wade Taylor, coming off 2 straight mediocre games. Matchup he should dominate in. We're going to core Wade Taylor at 8.2. He's going to be a guy that we prioritize in all formats. Core play number 2 at 6.8 is going to be Carlton Carrington for Pitt. The matchup against Wake, it's just he has the skill set to give them major problems, already did. At worst, we're talking about a guy who's going to give us 24 to 26 fantasy points. I feel like he's going to do more. Right now, I have him right around 29.5, and that's at 36 minutes. So love Carlton Carrington. He's core play number 2. And then number 3, got to go with the Texas Tech guy. And this can be an either or, Pop Isaacs or Joe Toussaint. Pop Isaacs projects better as of right now, but I do trust and like Joey T a little bit more. They're priced so similarly, though. It's kind of a personal preference there. 6K for Joe T or 6.3 for Pop Isaacs. So that's a personal choice for you as you're building your lineups. I'll probably end up splitting them, but right now I'm leaning more towards Joey T as my main team guy. All right, let's go to PrizePicks. And then as far as like a possible posh play of the day, which if you're new to the show, that is my sneak of the slate. Claudel Harris of BC is giving me those posh play of the day vibes. Or Cam Spencer of UConn, because I think people are going to overlook UConn if it's even possible to do so. And rostership on him is going to be really low. So Cam Spencer is one of those lower owned guys that I think will do good. All right, PrizePicks. Now, as always, give you my spiel. They don't give us fantasy points till the next day, so I don't have that available. Usually when the article releases, I update that, but there are 2 or 3 that I looked at prior to the show that I felt pretty good about. I'm just going to double check those are still the same before I give them, just in case. All right, number 1, Jalen Sellers versus West Virginia at 16.5 points, real points. I think Sellers hangs 20 on this West Virginia team. He's been so good transferring in from Ball State. West Virginia defensively, just, Jesse Edwards back is a big deal. That's been a nice boost for them, but still, they are giving up a ton. Jalen Sellers has a shot rate of 27%. He scored 15, 17, and 20 over his last 3, so give me that. He scored 18 against West Virginia in their first matchup, and that was in 27 minutes. Typically going to play 34, 35. He should eclipse that number relatively easy. That's PrizePicks number 1. I would have hit Ray Battle over 13.5, but they made it 15.5 this time. Not that it's bad. Cam Spencer over 14.5 real points against Creighton. This is a Cam Spencer game. Just remember that. This is going to be a Cam Spencer deliver us from evil type of game. Carlton Carrington over 12.5 points against Wake Forest. I'm hanging my hat on him for sure. And then there is for later night, Boise State versus San Jose State. Tibet Gorener over or under. So under for you, 9.5 real points for Tibet. San Jose State has fallen apart. Their roster is really bad, and they're just really struggling right now. All right, and then one more for PRA purposes. Cam Spencer over 21.5 PRA. He's just locked in. He has hit that in, I believe, 3 of his last 4. Let me just double check that. I have been, when I go to the DK book, which is basically in my backyard, it's always one that I throw into every parlay or whatever I'm making. Yeah, so he's made that in actually 5 straight. So over 21.5 PRA for Cam Spencer. All right, now getting to the chat here, you asked about playing FanDuel. Okay, that's cool. UCF versus West Virginia. So that's probably on. Is that on the FanDuel slate? I need to look at FanDuel more, especially you guys are going to be playing that more as well. They have had some much better contests. Part of the problem with FanDuel is that they just didn't offer any like decent enough contests to be worth playing, and now they're starting to do that. So, yeah. Was it a 6-gamer? Okay, so a 6-gamer on FanDuel, and they are having UCF and West Virginia. Okay, well, let's see here. Give you some price. Let's get some prices pulled up, and then we'll talk about that one right quick. 6-game slate's kind of lame, though, right? Could have done better than that. That's what I'm talking about. But at least they're offering it. All right. So Ray Battle at 6'6". I always got to check him. That's my guy. So I want to start with Jalen Sellers, who's priced at 6'2". I know FanDuel a little bit different price there. Definitely like that for him. CJ Walker at 4'4" is an excellent value. He's back from before it was Marcellus Avery, but now that Walker's back and seemingly healthy, stepped into a starter spot right after missing 3 or 4 games. He missed a ton of time to start the season. Off the bench against Texas Tech after missing 4 games, 28 minutes, 13 points, 8 rebounds. He has started the last 2 games. BYU and Cincinnati are much tougher matchups than what he's going to see here against West Virginia. So you can look at his last 2 logs and kind of gloss over those and not worry as much. I know a lot of people will probably not use him for that reason, but on FanDuel, you can get away with taking a really low score from some of the values, and 4-4 for Walker is very good, especially as a starter that I'm expecting to play 20-plus minutes. So you can go with Walker. You can go with Jalen Sellers, who I'm kind of hanging my hat on. I don't mind Ray Battle there for GPPs. I'm always in on Battle. I'm one of the last people in the industry. That's my guy. Watched him play in high school for many years. I absolutely support him. So sometimes it's to a fault, but as long as he's under 7K on either side, I think he's very much in consideration. And then as far as top stacks, which you're talking about FanDuel, so I'm guessing you want top stacks for FanDuel. Tennessee, like a mini stack against Missouri there. Otherwise, the most obvious one to me would be Texas Tech and TCU. Connecticut, obviously, they're going to be priced up. Iowa games have been really wonky lately. And then Baylor, BYU. BYU is just a little too deep. So I feel really confident in reading the Texas Tech game. Went over that extensively there, so you kind of understand already what I was talking about on DraftKings. But when you look at it on the way FanDuel has their stuff priced, let me get this back up. This is the game that I just want to have a ton of. Like Jameer Nelson's only 5.2 on FanDuel. If he continues to start, that's really good. Trevian Tennyson is only 4.7. Now you don't get the 3-point bonuses that you would there on DraftKings, but still playing 30-plus minutes as a starter, I would imagine still over Avery Anderson. That's just way too cheap. Jacoby Coles is interesting for a GPP stack at 4.3. Always like him. And then you have cheapies like Chuck O'Bannon at 3.5. Again, you can get away on FanDuel with like semi-punting to a near 0 and having it work out. And then on the Texas Tech side, Joey T's only 5.9. Robert Jennings only 4.7. If Warren Washington is out, you have a ton of value right there that you can utilize. That price on Joe T is way too cheap. I feel like people are just going to completely gloss over that. The 6.5 on Pop Isaacs is playable as well, but Joe Toussaint and Robert Jennings are two plays there on FanDuel that I absolutely love as long as Warren Washington's out for Jennings, but Joe T, either way, he's one of my favorite plays on the slate that wasn't a core at the end, but I'm definitely going to have a lot of exposure to. So that's my favorite FanDuel stack for you, my friend. Oh, yeah. I need to start playing on FanDuel because like I said, their contests are better or have been better lately, and the pricing is just awful. Like, I know the last TCU slate or a couple of Micah Peavy was priced inexplicably at like $4K or something like that. I know he's priced at 6.1 now, but I saw him at near min price and it was like, okay, so everyone's going to be playing Micah Peavy. It wasn't even that great of a play that day, but how do you not play him at 4K near min price? All right, that is going to wrap it up. Thank you to the new subs that checked us out. I appreciate that very much. We'll be back tomorrow night, same time. We've been starting a little bit later at 10 p.m. PST instead of 9. That is just because of my situation at home with family and getting them to sleep. So I appreciate those of you who have stayed up late, watching live or on demand. Will be articled out in the early afternoon and a projection sheet out early. I'll be editing the minutes tonight. That will be something that you're able to check out by the early afternoon at the latest so that you can build for the earlier lock. Lots of contests, lots of money out there to be made. The NBA All-Star break wrapping up. March Madness on the cusp of starting. Lots of fun stuff going on. We're also going to do some contests for FTN subs and show watchers / viewers, which involve prize giveaways, draft leagues, players in tournaments, all kinds of stuff like that. We'll explain that more in the next couple of weeks, but lots of opportunity for you to win swag, money, and other items. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Take care. Win money. Get to the window and end the night with lots of green screens. See you guys tomorrow.